for the opportunity. We're ARC Project. We're a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We're devoted to digitally archiving cultural heritage at every scale, from the intensely personal to the monumental, through the empowerment of individuals, communities, heritage professionals, preservationists, and even government agencies in new and groundbreaking ways to digitally preserve culture on the lands and sites they serve, while focusing on easily accessible technologies and techniques for the process. We've aided institutions and communities around the world by teaching how to digitally document UNESCO World Heritage Sites, historical monuments, museum collections, public art, personal works, and even whole ecologies. We believe our compelling 3D models and virtual experiences help uplift the stories of those unique places, expand access, and ideally create a valuable digital archive for posterity. So how did this all come about? Well, we ultimately started as an emergency digital archiving organization of heritage around the globe. But since then, we've evolved our work to go beyond that initial mission, expanding our scope of research and engagement with partners across disciplines to fulfill a range of goals which intersect with cultural heritage and technology. Our role has really become about being facilitators. We're looking to show people not only how the technology works, but also how 3D technology can be used for them, for their communities, and all of our collective memories. It's a much larger story and I can't tell it all, but we do understand that each community has different needs and there is not really a one-size-fits-all approach to digital archiving. We work to provide people the full plethora of tool sets to capturing, archiving, and displaying their heritage. And our project's aim is to ensure that the decisions about which objects, which sites, or buildings to choose for archiving and digitization is in the hands of the community in which that heritage resides. So I'm looking to play a little video here of some of our work, which I think will tell a lot more than anything I can say. Local volunteers are really the beating heart of our initiatives, allowing us and our cultural institution partners to digitize much more that than could have been achieved otherwise. The ARC project is ultimately agnostic when it comes to what form digital heritage ends up, what type of digital heritage ends up being preserved. But we do see the immense power of techniques such as photogrammetry and videogrammetry in terms of their accessibility, the relative ease of use, collaborative as well as additive qualities. ARC actively promotes, teaches, and shares photogrammetry to empower citizen scientists, volunteers, cultural heritage organizations, and indigenous communities to document and archive their own cultural heritage in new and powerful ways, while simultaneously adhering to ethical practices. By these means, people can participate preemptively in protecting their own culture, cultural heritage assets by capturing photos of them in detail from all angles before they are either damaged or destroyed. We're always doing this with an eye towards ethical practices, which are constantly evolving. Digital access, whether it be via website, VR, or AR, is allowing these sorts of heritage moments to be enjoyed by visitors who traditionally wouldn't have otherwise, such as those in the disabled community or groups who live far away from the site. I'm now going to introduce our co-founder and executive director, Brian Pope, to discuss how photogrammetry works and what are some of its applications. Brian?
And I think I'm on now. Yes, hopefully. Thanks, Scott. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to talk to you basically simply about the process of photogrammetry. This is the process by which we do most of our archiving. What you're looking at right now, hopefully, should be a screen showing various floating objects. These are icons representing the location of a camera when it took a single image of the object that's in the center of this sort of vortex of floating objects. So from just this many photographs, one is able then to introduce overlapping photographs into a photogrammetry software, which then studies the spatial relationships that are sort of implicit between two or more overlapping photographs. It doesn't take that many, as you can see, to derive, Scott, or Brittany, next slide, if you will, to derive what's called a point cloud. So from the photographs of the original object, analyzed in software, the software then generates a concept of overlapping common points across all of the photographs. From there, the point cloud is then reanalyzed to become a polygonal mesh, which with the latest versions of the software has even gained the ability to study volumes, to know the volume of an object, which is really key when you think about the potential to archive objects which change over time. Imagine the ability to analyze a coral reef that's been photographed in this manner. Next slide, if you will. Here is a real world example. This is a stunning piece of work that was done by one of our volunteers in Venezuela with very little training. We were able to teach the volunteer how to do the kind of overlapping photographs. Generally, photographs need to overlap by 60 to 70% so that the software can recognize the commonalities across all of the photos and then generate those spatial relationships to ultimately derive a 3D model. In this case, this is a statue in a park in Venezuela, which was identified as a very, very high risk object. It had already been defaced several times, and because of the 10 million percentile inflation these people live with, any material really has its ultimate value only as its intrinsic material. So any object is really right now only being valued for what it's made of. Copper and bronze are being cut up overnight and heritage is disappearing. This volunteer identified this site as something that was important to the Venezuelan people and was also at very high risk. You can see that it takes quite a few photographs in this case to get it right, but this is a beautiful example of what a volunteer can be trained to do even remotely with very little effort. And it's also worth noting, in the lack of advanced or expensive camera gear, it doesn't matter. Even a smartphone can be used to archive heritage. And we think that's an incredible, beautiful empowerment of technology, but also of cultural access. Next slide, if you will. Now, here's an extreme example of what photogrammetry can do. We worked on this model for a few years, working with the 2141 Collective in British Columbia, Canada. Now, this is an interesting story. The 2141 is a locomotive, the last of its kind, of 99. It's about 125 years old. It had become a rusted out hulk, a dead thing in a playground. Actually, while we were shooting it, adults walked by and said, wait a minute, isn't this the thing I played on as a kid? The story of this is fascinating, furthermore, for how they've continued to support what you can imagine is an incredibly expensive and demanding repair regime. And when a part breaks on this train, well, there's nowhere to go for a replacement. It has to be re-engineered from scratch. Very expensive process. The way this organization has kept in business to maintain and keep this train alive as living heritage is by largely renting it out for a few holiday events once or twice a year, but primarily as on-location filming sets. So you'll recall, you'll know, of course, that over the last 15 years, period films have had an amazing resurgence. And you've probably seen this train in many films or television series and not even known it. The problem has become, though, that they are now denied access to the very tracks that they need to do the on-location filming. Having heard about their plight, we contacted them and developed a beautiful relationship that's ongoing. And we took, I think it was 5 or 6 days, took over 18,000 photographs and about a year and a half of constantly breaking the software to generate a model which can now be used as a visual effects asset so that they can still work with their beautiful physical heritage, but when it's time to get the long shot that's no longer possible, they have an incredibly detailed, highly accurate visual effects asset, which helps keep their mode of earning revenue and keeping alive intact. we're incredibly proud of that work and see this becoming a much, much more important and integral part of virtual production as things go on, as time goes on. Next slide, please. Now, this is a quick shot of actually the inaugural project that made Art Project. I created Art Project with this moment in mind. This is one of the 3 primary sites that we've archived from Palmyra, a 2,000-year-old city in Syria that was unfortunately made the target of ISIS. As an object of idolatry, they felt compelled to destroy anything they couldn't steal, and most of Palmyra is now a rubble field. We, in this case, were too late to do anything to prevent that, but we did what's called crowdsourced photogrammetry, and I'm proud to say Art Project is one of the only, if not the only organization still that has used crowdsourced photogrammetry for world public interest. And what's really empowering about this concept, these photographs that then became the 3D model that you're looking at was not done by a single photographer or a single volunteer. In fact, it was done by thousands of photographers over a long period of time as tourists, archaeologists, architectural studies. Those images were culled from the World Wide Web, from the Creative Commons, to then create a somewhat more crude model, but one that is always evolving. So imagine then all those different people over multiple years taking and making available the data that they've captured in even their tourist photographs and making each photograph as if it were a single neuron in the global collective memory. As we evolve as a species, this is what we're capable of. And we just think it's a gorgeous and astonishing empowerment to make culture not only more preservable, but to make it more accessible. Next slide, please. Now, in this example, what you're looking at is just a single screen grab from a shared virtual reality event, which underscores the fact that archiving technology is not merely archiving something and throwing it in a dusty drawer, a digital drawer even. It's meant to make it more accessible. And even in this case, in which what you're looking at is the Arch of Triumph, the central axis of the ancient city, now also pretty much just a rubble field, but the symbolism and the importance, the cultural importance of this site, we believe is kept at least conceptually intact by this work. And in fact, the screen grab that you're looking at was from an incredible project, really groundbreaking, so lovely. 20 people in a shared VR simulation scattered across the country, being hosted by a Syrian professor of antiquities, Amr al-Lazim, a fantastic man who now teaches at Ohio Shawnee State University. He, unintentionally, as he was guiding the 20 guests through the simulation as our docent, actually proved the emotional value and the cultural value of a simulation like this. As pushing through the simulation, he actually became very, very emotional. And it actually evoked memories of the place that he had not had in years. Now, we've talked about monumental culture and the preservation of what one might consider merely dead objects. But as soon as this project was over, we began questioning ourselves about whether there was an opportunity for these kinds of techniques to actually archive ephemeral, intangible culture, ceremonies, events, dances, things like that. And to tell you more about where we are currently working as sort of a laboratory, we've begun working on a conceptual project with the Venezuelan volunteers who've been capturing a beautiful ritual that goes on once a year. And Scott Purdy will now tell you more about that.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, the Devil Dancers of Yare is indeed a great social experiment, which we are embarking on, one in which we're working to really push the boundaries of mixing built and intangible heritage into a seamless whole through VR. So what does that really entail? Well, the Devil Dancers is a really unique Catholic tradition, sort of akin to Mardi Gras here in the States, in a region that has been going on, and that it's been going on for centuries in that area. And the people of San Francisco de Yare celebrate the feast of the Corpus Christi through dance and dressing up in devil masks after being blessed by the local priest. So this tradition has a myriad of rituals and rules, and was declared an intangible cultural heritage
super well.
of humanity by Unesco back in 2012. So we worked with volunteers to capture not only the cobblestone streets, the buildings, and the churches that line the route, but also the religious reliquaries that were part of the process, the musical instruments, and the videos of the dancers themselves. So the idea here is to be able to make it seamless. The 3D photogrammetry allows for the digital space to be embedded with a variety of videos and interactive experiences that gives each viewer free agency to explore multiple aspects of the tradition itself. The Devil Dancers have had to deal with not only COVID this year, but also the Maduro regime, which Brian mentioned earlier. And that's really making the continuation of this event somewhat uncertain. It's our hope that through these technologies, which are meant to be interactive, there will also be an archival aspect should intangible culture be threatened or, God forbid, it disappear. We believe this sort of interactive display of built and intangible heritage is the future of digital engagement and archiving. I'm going to present one more video just to give people a sense of things. So here's several more examples of heritage captured around the world, as well as right here in California. With 3D becoming more and more ubiquitous, we see a potential digital gold rush where individuals and companies look to profit by capturing and selling this digital heritage. Through our general collections policy, as well as our Native American collections policy, we hope to offer another path, one in which cultural stakeholders and caretakers are in control and have options on how they wish to present and author digital content for their own communities. We're hoping, but of course we're not holding our breath, that the policies on the national and international levels can be beefed up to ensure copyright protections for digital heritage. The technology also affords a really excellent opportunity to easily and compellingly show the multiple layers of history of a site, bringing to life forgotten cultures and stories that may have been all but erased from the physical site. Next slide, please. These next few slides are just a few examples, since we are talking about the California Preservation Foundation, of some architectural sites and how we were able to capture these photogrammetrically, and some of the detail that you're able to see through that. Ultimately, the volunteers were the thing that allowed us to be able to capture so much in such a small amount of time. A lot of these are UNESCO heritage sites in Caracas. You can see the volunteer base doing their thing. They're very passionate about what they do because they know they're preserving it for posterity. And the sites are super varied. You've got plazas and large buildings. We do drone work sometimes as well. I'm going to briefly mention the concept of how folks are able to round trip the data. If we were not able to go to Venezuela, but we thought very successful in being able to do Zoom conferences to show individuals what they did right and what they did wrong, so they can go back and reshoot. Since photogrammetry is an additive process, it allows for that. And I think we were quite successful in that process. Slide 26, if you could, Brittany. And then I'm going to hand it over to you. So ultimately, we think that this template can be used for virtually any cultural heritage site. Of course, it's varied and needs to be tailor-made and to each site. And of course, the ethical practices are different for each and every individual site. But we really do see this template of using volunteers and the democratized approach as one that will allow not only for a much larger amount of capture, but also very rich and locally sourced capture of heritage from the community. I'm going to turn this over to Brittany. Brittany's Brittany is our Director of Development, and she's going to talk a little bit about partnerships. I know we're running short on time. Brittany?
Thank you, Scott. So this is our first foray with the California Preservation Foundation, and we're really excited to continue this relationship and continue to talk about these wonderful ideas in future engagements. We also are really excited to offer an in-person workshop on photogrammetry in the future to get hands-on experience so we can test out some of these techniques. And the ARC project really loves to position ourselves as a think tank. We want to move the field forward with creative approaches to technology, new methodologies, and we really want to prioritize access. So in the meantime, we invite you to visit our website, arck-project.org, follow us on social media, and contact us. We welcome you to contact us and get involved with what your project is doing. We'd love to be a resource. And lastly, we'd love your support. Your contributions and gifts and ideas go towards our goals of capturing, education, and archiving for generations to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Brittany. And as a segue, I'm going to give Allison Rose Jefferson a few minutes to get herself situated and started here. As a brief way of introduction, Allison has spoken for CPF before on a number of topics, but today she'll be talking about the Belmar Art and History Project in Santa Monica. And so Allison, whenever you're ready, you're more than welcome to pull up your slides and get going here. I see you're on, you're muted, so. Oops, I muted you. That was my fault. Let me try that again. Okay, there you go.
Now, okay, so here we go. I'm going to put my slides up. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to everybody about the Belmar History Plus Art Project. I am a historian and heritage conservation consultant, and I'm just finishing up a project. I'm just finishing up a position at Occidental College's Institute for the Study of Los Angeles as a guest scholar, and I'm getting ready to start another position like that at the Getty Conservation Institute in the fall. So you've heard one perspective today of looking at interpretation, and I'm going to give another one that's a more local example. So as a historian and heritage conservation consultant, sorry guys, I'm just getting myself situated here. Okay, as a historian and heritage conservation consultant, my interests are in the use of history in a broader educational programs, inclusive of sites that are living links to the past, present, and future generations, that are the physical and spiritual reminders of significant times, people, places in American history and culture. Intentionally, my work is a social action practice to expand knowledge for the construction of a more inclusive public culture, historical memory, and national identity, encompassing the diverse experiences of the American people, and to help dismantle institutional racism. Belmar History Plus Art, which I will discuss today, is an outgrowth of my continuing work to make the historical Black experience more visible through different methods for people's enjoyment as they gain knowledge and inspiration, excuse me, that can empower them now and in the future. The project originated at a March 2019 California Coastal Commission meeting in Los Angeles, where I seized the opportunity to advocate that Santa Monica officials be required to develop an educational and interpretive program to teach the public about the erased history of the early African American visitors, residents, and business persons who contributed to making Santa Monica a vibrant and unique place from the 1900s to 1960s in the beach neighborhoods south of the 10 freeway, around the Civic Center campus area, as a construction permit condition for what is now the new historic Belmar Park at 4th and Pico. The commissioners saw my proposal as an action to set in motion their new wider environmental justice policy strategies and implementation of their, and as a way to implement their new authority to help ensure equitable coastal access for marginalized communities. Santa Monica officials found funding to develop this new initiative attached to the park's construction permit, and invited me to participate in its development. In a year's time, I and other contributors produced this multifaceted project, Belmar History and Art, the first applied history and art project undertaken by the city. My recent book, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era, examines the local stories of African Americans who fought for equal access to California's recreational offerings at specific places as they contributed to the broader US freedom rights struggle during the nation's Jim Crow era. They made history in what has been called the frontier of leisure in their attempts to create communities and business projects in conjunction with their growing population in Southern California. Leisure was not an optional add-on to civil rights, but an essential component of liberty. Santa Monica is one of these communities that is examined in my book. I unearthed in this book chapter and in a context essay the things that underpin the work that I and others produced for the Belmar History Plus Art endeavor. In addition to the essay, other project programming includes a permanent outdoor exhibition of story panels for which I created the narratives, and a large sculpture created by artist April Banks. I, with UCLA colleagues and master public school teachers, developed K through 12 lessons to meet the California State History, Social Science, and Ethnic Studies framework and curriculum guidelines. These lessons, along with my new essay, will be available on the city's website and on my website too, for that matter, along with other educational resources and inspirational materials and other project programming features such as high school art projects. Workshops are also planned to introduce the curriculum to teachers for use in their classrooms in local schools. The first African Americans settled in Santa Monica in the 1880s, joining a multi-ethnic community of many national and global backgrounds in building the new city. Most Black migrants were from southern states, attracted by the climate, possibilities for new life opportunities, and escape from Jim Crow era white supremacy, anti-Black restrictions, and racial injustice. They joined other migrants in seeking their California and American dreams. The city of Santa Monica has the oldest African-American settlement of any Pacific Rim city in the region. African-Americans lived among other groups from the 1900s to around 1960 in residential clusters in South Santa Monica neighborhoods radiating around Phillips Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church at 4th and Bay Streets in Ocean Park. The other Black neighborhoods were in the area that was called the Belmar Triangle, where the Civic Auditorium and new historic Belmar Park and the LA County Courthouse are today, north of Pico and south of Civic Center Drive between 4th and Main Streets, and also on streets north of Santa Monica High School and east of 4th Street. A short way south, there was also a Venice neighborhood, which was part of this early Santa Monica African-American community. Until the World War II years and following decades, most of these early pioneers worked in domestic and service employment, while a few were small business entrepreneurs. All had faith in the promise of upward mobility. Education for their children was very important. They saved their money and bought homes and sometimes other real estate as soon as they could. They were strivers, joiners, and civil rights leaders, not unlike those African Americans who moved to other parts of the West during the early decades of the 20th century. Like their counterparts all over the United States, African Americans lived, worked, and found joy in the offerings of their environs, even as they tirelessly challenged oppression and discrimination in Santa Monica to dismantle barriers to dismantle racial barriers when civil rights laws that had been passed as early as 1893 were not enforced. Many of the Black community members in these neighborhoods attended Phillips Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, which was opened in its own building in 1909 and was Santa Monica's first African-American spiritual and institutional structure. It was also the denomination's first church west of Texas. The 11 stained glass windows of the church commemorate local African-American families who were members. In 2005, based on my research and leadership efforts, Phillips Chapel was designated as a City of Santa Monica local landmark for cultural significance. The first minister of Phillips Chapel was the Reverend James A. Stout, who migrated with his family from Texas to Santa Monica. The Stouts, along with other extended family members, made Santa Monica their permanent home. Christine Lawson, granddaughter of Christine Lawson, the Stouts' granddaughter, her children, her grandchildren, and new great-grandchildren continue to make their home in the Ocean Park neighborhood. Christine's father, Hilliard Lawson, was civically active and became the second African-American who served on the Santa Monica City Council from 1973 to 75. When you're down in Santa Monica again, you can check out Lawson's photograph when you pass through the City Hall and look at the lobby walls. The pioneering Black-owned business enterprise La Bonita opened around 1914 in the Belmar Triangle, where the Civic Auditorium is today. It provided African Americans with a place to change into their bathing suits, rent a guest room, and or have refreshments. Through a succession of owners and different business configurations, La Bonita lasted until it was razed for the 1950s Civic Center expansion. This and other nearby businesses provided services to African Americans from Santa Monica and beyond, particularly when they came to enjoy the Pacific Ocean a few blocks away. This venture was among the few very important unsuccessful attempts at beach area businesses, at beach area business development that were sabotaged by white supremacist actions overlapped by the rise of Black beach culture and residency to support a deeper community life and African-American made place in the Bay City environs. Down the hill from La Bonita and Phillips Chapel was the beach, which became the most popular with African Americans in Santa Monica and those visiting from the Los Angeles region and beyond during the Jim Crow era from the 1900s to 1960s, especially after the Black-owned Bruce's Beach Resort business and residential community in Manhattan Beach was destroyed by public power abuse and anti-Black racism in 1924. First made a Santa Monica landmark in 2008 based on intangible heritage, this site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in June 2019 for its significance as a place of African-American recreation and civil rights struggle in United States history. It is the first historic district in Santa Monica to receive this national honor, and it is one of the few in California with any, associated with any community of color. Several of Santa Monica's pioneering African-American families, such as the Brunsons, the Carters, the Maxwells, the Dumases, the Gabaldons, and others lived on the streets north of Santa Monica High School before the expansion of the campus buildings and the Interstate 10 freeway construction raised the neighborhood from the 1930s to 1960s. A resident of this neighborhood when he was a toddler was Nick Gabaldon, who has become a folk hero as a surfing pioneer of color. Belmar History Plus Art was developed as the nation and the world grappled simultaneously with a pandemic, a bizarre dystopian United States presidential election drama, and the reinvigoration of the demand for racial equity and Black dignity and citizenship that had been forced prominently onto the national and global agenda. The project is a timely contribution to this dialogue as it helps open and inform contemporary life for understanding of those who came before us in Santa Monica's historical African-American community life. It helps build a broader, richer, and more accurate understanding of our shared history and identity in our global, national, regional, and local citizenship. At the same time, this project is a reminder there is still so much that is not understood about the history of Santa Monica, California, and the US. There continues to be history and places which need to be documented and made known to people. Last year, celebration and symbolism of changes in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter in the US and globally were articulated in the dismantling, and the dismantling is still going on today, to facing and scheduling a removal of monuments that symbolize iconography of a racist past, and that are a reminder of how official systems have failed us. A wide range of structures are described as monuments, commemorative, and storytelling spaces that spaces that are these spaces are rooted in the ideals of commemorative justice. And we should, oh, sorry, I screwed up my text. Sorry. So what I was saying is that a wide range of structures are described as monuments, commemorative, and storytelling spaces that exist at the intersection of public space and political power, public memory, and the enthusiasm of the groups which install them. Removal of public space symbols to racist past are a significant step to a more just future and are important to overdue structural reforms. Symbolism does matter. Recognition of more diverse sites and creation of new public displays that recognize the underrepresented and challenge hegemonic and white supremacist narratives will help connect to a more representative history and identity. These new initiatives can be vehicles for healing and education, as well as cultural tourism in communities. These highlighted old, new, and needed future public actions are also reminders there are still changes that must occur to dismantle white supremacy, police brutality, and anti-Black racism for a better society. Simultaneously to needed national heritage conservation policy reform, new forms of monuments and spaces rooted in the ideals of commemorative justice should be asked for by those demanding more inclusive narratives in public displays. These broader and innovative ways of sharing untold stories and places of Black life alongside designating landmarks, erecting traditional monuments and other remembrance spaces will have a more lasting societal structural effect. This is what we have done in the development of Belmar History Plus Arts multifaceted educational, inspirational, and remembrance programming that tells a more complex American story that will enliven the past in resonating ways for more diverse constituents. The reconstruction of public meanings of Santa Monica's urban landscape and heritage conservation amplifies a broader societal understanding of Black life as part of our collective and diverse California cultural heritage to provide broader coastal zone accessibility for present and future generations. This Santa Monica initiative is an important symbolic action of equity and inclusion for commemorative, social, and environmental justice that recognizes African Americans and other marginalized communities have contributed to making the colorful history of Santa Monica, that we have a right to historical and cultural sites and a place in the American identity, along with access to clean air, clean water, and the enjoyment of America's natural and other resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. That was incredible. Learned so much about Santa Monica. Chris French will be co-moderating with me. So at this point, I'm gonna be asking our other panelists to join us as a group, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris for the first question.
Okay, I'm going to start with Allison. And John, if you wouldn't mind putting up some of the links that the ARC project had provided for us to share with the audience in that email. Allison, so your project is so compelling. Have you found a lot of support in the, not just in the California community, but in widespread nationally and for your work?
So at this point in time, you know, it takes a while for the media to get a hold of things, but we did get some coverage from folks in terms of, you know, the national media. And I think that we're going to be getting some reviews in some of the academic journals. You know, the city of Santa Monica is the one that's involved in doing the press, and they are, you know, that's not necessarily their priority. But, you know, I have shared the project with as many people as I could. And so I'm hoping that as the people get a chance to see it, and as we get the lesson plans up, there'll be other opportunities to engage a broader public in the project. And so coming to do a presentation with the California Preservation Foundation is, you know, one way to share with a broader audience this, you know, really innovative project.
No, we really appreciate it. And this will be also available as a recording on our YouTube and our Facebook, everybody, so you can share it with your friends. John, did you want to go ahead with the next question?
Yeah, and this is a question for our group from ARC. So there's a question from Wendy, and she's asking about the technology. She maybe wanted you to sort of elaborate on the differences between LiDAR and the technology that you're describing. And is this like LiDAR, where it's, or is it different? Is it just stitching photography together, or does it work a lot like LiDAR? Oh, Brian, you're muted, sorry.
Happy to address that question. Me and the mute button, we're not getting along so well. So there are certain similarities, but I also want to underscore the fact that photogrammetry is definitely not stitching. When we talk about the overlapping photos, sometimes people do get the impression that we're talking about maybe an intelligent flip book that's going back and forth between photographs of different angles. LiDAR establishes, you know, so it pings the object with a laser thousands of times a second and begins to build a 3D map by gauging how long it takes that light beam to leave the laser and bounce back off the object in question. Photogrammetry is actually taking overlapping photos, but it's not to stitch them. It's so that we, basically the software, you used to have to do this manually. Can you imagine? The software recognizes, this point, this bright blue pixel in one photograph might be the same object from a different angle, multiplied by 10 billion, and you end up with an idea of the computer basically identifying through developments in pixel motion estimation technology and these other algorithms that have made it possible for a computer to begin to realize, oh, I think I know what I'm looking at. It looks like the same thing in a different photograph, just from this angle, this angle, this angle, etc. And it builds up the point cloud, the high confidence calculations. Each point in the point cloud is a high confidence value. It's basically the computer saying, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the same object, just at different places. And from that, it extrapolates this 3D point cloud, which we then draw lines in between and make them polygons, and then put an image on it from the original photographs. LiDAR isn't as good at doing certain things that photogrammetry is, and photogrammetry isn't as perhaps exactly spatially accurate as LiDAR. We think there's a beautiful overlap in these technologies. They're completely mutually compatible that needs to be developed further. Right now, it's there's very little high-level integration of these, and we absolutely know that that's one of the future, immediate future developments, because there are intrinsic benefits to both technologies. We should be doing them both at the same time, ideally.
Great answer. I constantly think back to my days in college in my geography department, looking at old stereograms of aerial images and being amazed that I'm looking at a three-dimensional view of a landscape. But it's progressed so much since then.
It really has. Right now, we're hoping also possibly even to fund some research on flexible objects. So right now we can't really do anything with any moving objects or flexing, bending objects. And of course, we need to start studying biomes in greater detail. I'm a scuba diver, and I've been doing a lot of tests with multiple camera arrays that I'm swimming around underwater. But the only kind of coral I can make photogrammetry work with currently is, of course, hard corals. We need to be looking at soft corals too. So there's a lot of potential in this technology that still hasn't been quite realized yet. It's going to be a bumpy and amazing ride over the next decade.
Brian, thanks for explaining that. I have heard the presentations from on these a couple times, and I am still confused, but I will keep trying.
Even now? Oh, I failed.
I don't know. It's great. I just need multiple repeating lessons, apparently. I wanted to ask Brittany a question real quick, and then I'm going to go to Allison. But Brittany, I had talked to you previously about the projects that you all are arranging, not just in California, but across the country. Did you want to just take a minute and sort of explain maybe what you're looking for, or what kind of collaborations that you're seeking?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Christine. So another project that we have going in Florida is all about capturing public art in 3D and taking that public art and turning it into more stories, creating 3D models, and creating an interactive map so that locals, residents, visitors, and curious folks around the world can experience that art and that culture online and in person. So that's another exciting project that we have coming up. And in terms of partnerships, we love making meaningful relationships with partners across different sectors, whether it's sciences, humanities, public art, archaeology, universities. So really creating innovative solutions together.
That's great. And then Brittany, do you want me to share the PowerPoint that you all showed? Because I can do that. Brian, there you go again. I'm going to have to mute you again.
I kept thinking you were handling the mute. Sorry, so can I just chime in then?
Okay, sure.
In answering Brittany's question, we also want to empower what they call citizen science in such a way that, yes, we use volunteers to capture data in the field, to take these photographs, but we're also working with scientists to develop ways to turn that data into something that scientists can use. So for example, a petroglyph that might be under attack by microbes, what they call biofilms, things like that. Well, you can actually use the visible data, even from an iPhone, to be able to study what's going on to degrade that petroglyph. So we're interested not just in volunteer work, but turning that volunteer work into usable scientific data. And I'll figure out the mute button someday.
Well, we will take control of that now, Brian. Anyways, I had a question for Allison. We have a question from Teresa about the important work that you're doing, and really I was very impressed with how comprehensive your views are. She says, is Allison working with the Tonga people regarding the recognition of indigenous lands?
So my specialty is American history and the African American experience, and I do, have some knowledge of what's going on in other areas of other communities in terms of documenting that history, but that's not my specialty. In Santa Monica, there is already, because I don't know where this person is from, but in Santa Monica, there is already a monument to the Tongva people in a park that is there across from the Civic Center, and it's called Tongva Park. And so in terms of a public space commemoration, it's there. And there are other people in the region who are historians who are more focused on that direction of work.
Excellent points, Allison. I was chatting with the person who asked the question, and I think she's from the Point Reyes area. And so just sort of to plug CPF's programming, if you ever have an idea like that in terms of covering a topic from a different angle or a different area of expertise, just contact us at cpf@californiapreservation.org, and we would love to do a program on the issues you're facing in your community. We really liked the progression from ARC to Allison's work because it showed you that the broad range of applications for these methodologies, everything from a global perspective to a local perspective. And Allison's work really brought it to a local perspective. And my next question really is for Allison, and maybe she can turn it over to the team at ARC to follow on that. But Allison, do you see a lot of possibilities and potential for some of these new digital technologies in layering the history that you've put so much work into and building on top of it and showing other histories? And how do you see that being applied?
Yes, I think in terms of what ARC is doing in certain instances, it could be applied to my work, easily. I don't know that we could so much apply it to the Belmar project because we don't even know what a lot of the houses look like in the neighborhood. But we certainly, and you all saw some of I gave some photographs of the lay of the land. So you got a sense of what it looked like at different time periods. And so we really only have kind of distant views of what the housing looked like. And we have Sanborn maps. And so, we can imagine maybe what the housing looked like in terms of that project. But there's other things I could see in terms of applications for the work that I'm doing in terms of storytelling and what have you, certainly. And that's why I thought it was kind of interesting to have what I'm doing and what they're doing together, because I'm doing a kind of more low-tech thing and they're doing a more high-tech thing. And actually even some of the things that we did with the history panels, I gave a few views of those. I mean, we could do some virtual stuff online with those things, the panels, and make the history 3D in terms of how we're illustrating it. It could be done in cartoons. I mean, these are things I've thought about, but at this point in time, we got this done, and maybe we'll be able to get some other things done if there's some money that can be raised.
Thank you, Allison. That was very helpful, and I'm going to turn it over to the team at ARC to follow on that. I know there were a few questions addressed in the Q&A box that Scott graciously answered by text, so we encourage you to look at those. But to follow on that, in terms of using these technologies to layer histories, to tell many different stories, how do you see, where do you at ARC see the most promise in the coming years?
Yeah, I can address that first by saying we're thrilled to meet Allison, and it's absolutely crucial that what we're doing be accompanied by human stories, by cultural stories, by the myths that still drive us, by our aspirations. And many academics have actually been sort of cautionary about the use of this technology because they believe somehow that we're overemphasizing the digital, when really what we should be talking about is how to fuse these. Because if you're not telling human stories, what is the point? And so we agree that, yeah, we won't always be able to do something, say, in 3D with the kind of work that Allison is doing. However, it doesn't, you can present, imagine those individual photographs of houses being placed as cards in a 3D world so that you could move from neighbor to neighbor as if you were visiting different houses, getting the individual stories that were told in those places, the individual lives that were lived there. It doesn't always have to be done with thousands of photographs and millions of polygons. It's all about stories. And we're actually thrilled at hearing Allison's answer. We'd love to try to collaborate on something.
Great. And with that, it looks like Allison is excited to collaborate.
We'll connect everybody.
With that, we're going to close out for the day. It's now 12:59 according to my computer, but maybe I'm wrong. It's 1:02.
You're behind about 3 minutes, John. We got to keep you on time.
I need to synchronize my clock, it looks like. But I just wanted to thank you all for your time today. All of our speakers, wonderful presentations. We're going to post this recording up on YouTube. So if you go to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/CalPreservation, CAL preservation, you can find today's video later today. And you can also find it on our Facebook channel. Chris just pasted a new program coming up starting in later in August, starting August 4th. And we will be looking at financial incentives for preservation. We're calling it Show Me the Money.
Show me the money, John.
Right.
Show me the money for financial incentives for historic preservation. So you don't want to miss that.
Absolutely. So with that being said, I'm going to give Chris the last word, and we're going to close out the meeting today, and I'll stop the recording.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. And we will see you again soon on an upcoming webinar, and check out our website.